Welcome back, readers. Welcome back to another Read Aloud for the week. This is our second Read Aloud where we continue our work with The Tiger Rising, and we also continue our work for this week, which is Author's Craft. So, yesterday we learned that another type of author's craft is the use of repetition, that an author may repeat a word, may repeat words, may repeat a phrase, or may even repeat an object. Why would the author do this? To highlight or signal to the reader that there's something really important here. So the text doesn't always explicitly say this is something important. So author's craft of repetition is a tool the author uses to signal to the reader, hey, I need you to focus on this. This is important. Okay, so let's continue to study author's craft today, looking for repetition. But let's remember the chart that we used when we studied author's craft yesterday is the one that it included an example from chapter 11 where Rob first tells Sistine about the tiger. And in the text, the author repeats all the different things that Sistine didn't say that Rob expected her to say. It went like this. She didn't say a real one. She didn't say, are you crazy? She didn't say, you're a big old liar. She said one word, where? And Rob knew then that he had picked the right person to tell. So if we're discussing author's craft for this author's use of repetition, it would sound like this using the author's craft prompt. The author wrote the repeated phrase, she didn't say, to show the reader that Sistine did not say any of the things that Rob expected her to say. Then you would go on to prove your answer by finding two details in the text that match your answer. We're going to continue to look for repetition in The Tiger Rising as we continue reading today. We're going to read chapters 25 through 27. And again, keep an eye out for repetition and think about discussing the repetition using our author's craft prompt. The author wrote blank because she wants to show the reader blank. Here we go. Chapter 25. The three of them walked through the woods in silence. Sistine and Rob chewed 8-ball gum and Willie Mae smoked a cigarette, and nobody said a word. Lord God, said Willie Mae when they came up to the cage. She stared at the pacing animal. Ain't no reason to doubt the fierceness of God when he makes something like that, she said. Who was the fool that caged this tiger up? He belongs to Beauchamp, Rob told her. Beauchamp, said Willie Mae with disgust. She shook her head. One person in the world that don't need to be owning no tiger, and that's Beauchamp. See, said Sistine, it's not right, is it? Just like you told Rob about your bird and how you had let it go. A bird, said Willie Mae, that's one thing. Tiger belonging to Beauchamp is another. Tell Rob that he should unlock the cage and let him go, Sistine demanded. I ain't, said Willie Mae. You gotta ask yourself, what's gonna happen to this tiger after you let him go? How's he going to live? Rob was flooded with sad relief. Willie Mae wasn't going to make him do it. He wasn't going to lose his tiger. Panthers live in these woods, argued Sistine. They survive. Used to, said Willie Mae. Don't know more. Sistine put her hands on her hips. You're not saying what you believe, she accused. You're not talking like a prophetess. That's 'cause I ain't no prophetess, said Willie Mae. All I am is somebody speaking the truth. And the truth is, there ain't nothing you can do for this tiger except to let it be. It's not right, said Sistine. Right ain't got nothing to do with it, muttered Willie Mae. Sometimes right don't count. I can't wait until my father comes to get me, said Sistine. He knows what's right. He'll set this tiger free. Rob looked at Sistine. Your daddy ain't coming for you, he said softly, shaking his head, amazed at what he suddenly knew to be true. My father is coming to get me, Sistine said through tight lips. Nah, said Rob sadly. He ain't. He's a liar like your mama said. You're the liar, said Sistine in a dark, cold voice. Her face was so white that it seemed to glow before him. And I hate you, she said to him. Everybody at school hates you too, even the teachers. You are a sissy. I hope I never ever see you again. She turned and walked away, and Rob stood and considered her words. He felt them on his skin like shards of broken glass. He was afraid to move. He was afraid of how deep they might go inside him. She don't mean it, said Willie Mae. She don't mean none of what she say right now. Rob shrugged. He bent and scratched his legs as hard as he could. He scratched and scratched, digging his nails in deep, trying to get to the bottom of the itch that was always there. Stop it, Willie Mae told him. Rob looked up at her. Let me tell you something, she said. I would love to see this tiger rise on up out of this cage. Yes, I would like to see him rise on up and attack Beauchamp. Serve him right for keeping a wild animal locked up, putting you in the middle of this, giving you the keys to this cage. Come on. She grabbed hold of Rob's hand. Let's get on up out of here. As they walked back to the Kentucky store, Rob thought about what Willie Mae said about the tiger rising on up. It reminded him of what she had said about his sadness needing to rise up. And when he thought about the two things together, the tiger and his sadness, the truth circled over and above him and then came and landed lightly on his shoulder. He knew what he had to do. Okay, readers, so here we are. We just finished reading chapter 25, and now I ask you, do you notice any word or words, maybe a phrase or object repeated in chapter 25? Chapter 26. He left Willie Mae at the motel and went down the highway. Sistine! He shouted as he ran. Sistine! He screamed. And miraculously, he saw her, her orange dress with the pink polka dots, glowing on the horizon. Sistine Bailey. Hey! He shouted. Sistine, I got something to tell you. I'm not talking to you, she shouted back. But he stopped. She turned around. She put her hands on her hips. He ran faster. I come to tell you about the tiger, he said when he caught up with her. What about him? I'm fixing to let him go, said Rob. She squinted her eyes at him. You won't do it, she said. Yes, I will, he told her. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the keys and held them in front of her, proudly, as if he had just conjured them out of thin air, as if they had never existed before. I'm going to do it, he said. I'm going to do it for you. Woo-wee! Somebody screamed, and Rob turned and saw Beauchamp coming at speed right toward them in his red Jeep. Oh no, whispered Rob. Is it him? Sistine whispered. Rob nodded. Beauchamp pulled over to the side of the road, spraying mud and water everywhere. You out getting your exercise? He hollered. Rob shrugged. Speak up, roared Beauchamp. He got out of the Jeep and came toward them. Rob quickly pocketed the keys. His heart thumped once, loudly, as if it was cautioning him to keep quiet, and then it went back to beating normally. Well, looky here, said Beauchamp when he saw Sistine. You out chasing girls? Is that it? Man after my own heart. This your girlfriend? Beauchamp pounded Rob on the back. No, sir, said Rob. He looked at Sistine. She was staring so hard at Beauchamp that Rob was afraid the man might burst into flames. I got more goods for you, Beauchamp said. I left them back at the motel with Ida Bell. Yes, sir, said Rob. What's your name, little thing? Beauchamp said, turning to Sistine. Rob's heart gave another warning thump. Lord only knew what Sistine would say to Beauchamp. But Sistine, as always, surprised him. She smiled sweetly at Beauchamp. Sissy, she said. Well, that's pretty, said Beauchamp. That's the kind of name worth running down the road after. He leaned over to Rob. Remember what we got going. You keeping your manly secrets, ain't you? Yes, sir, said Rob. Beauchamp winked. His toothpick wiggled. I got me some business in town, he said. He squeezed Rob's shoulder hard and then took his hand away. You and your girlfriend stay out of trouble now, you hear? Yes, sir, said Rob. Beauchamp swaggered back to the Jeep, and Rob and Sistine stood together and watched him get in it and roar down the highway. He's afraid, said Sistine. He's afraid of the tiger. That's why he's making you feed him. Rob nodded. That was another truth he had known without knowing it, the same as he had known that Sistine's father was not coming back. He must, he realized, know somewhere, deep inside him, more things than he had ever dreamed of. I'm sorry, he said. What I said about your daddy, I'm sorry. I don't want to talk about my father, said Sistine. Maybe he is coming to get you. He's not coming to get me, Sistine tossed her head. And I don't care. It doesn't matter. What matters is the tiger. Let's go. Let's go set him free. Okay, readers, we just finished chapter 26. And now I ask you again. Do you notice any word or words, maybe a phrase or object repeated in chapter 26? Chapter 27. The first key slid into the first lock so smoothly that it made Rob dizzy with amazement. It was going to be so easy to let the tiger go. Hurry, Sistine said to him. Hurry up, get the other locks. He opened the second lock and the third, and then he took them off one by one and handed them to Sistine, who laid them on the ground. Now open the door, she said. Rob's heart pounded and fluttered in his chest. What if he eats us? He asked. He won't, said Sistine. He'll leave us alone out of gratitude. We're his emancipators. Rob flung the door wide. Get out of the way, he shouted, and they both jumped back from the door and waited. But the tiger ignored them. He continued to pace back and forth in the cage, oblivious to the open door. Go on, Rob said to him. You're free, Sistine whispered, but the tiger did not even look in the direction of the door. Sistine crept forward and grabbed hold of the cage. She shook it. Get out, she screamed. Come on, she said, turning to Rob. Help me get him out. Rob grabbed hold of the fence and shook it. Get, he said. The tiger stopped pacing and turned to stare at them both, clinging like monkeys to the cage. Go on, Rob shouted, suddenly furious. He shook the cage harder. He yelled. He put his head back and howled, and he saw that the sky above them was thick with clouds, and that made him even angrier. He yelled louder. He shouted at the dark sky. He shook the cage as hard as he could. Sistine put a hand on his arm. Shh, she said. He's leaving. Watch. As they stared, the tiger stepped with grace and delicacy out of the cage. He put his nose up and sniffed. He took one tiny step and then another. Then he stopped and stood still. Sistine clapped her hands, and the tiger turned and looked back at them both, his eyes blazing. And then he started to run. He ran so fast it looked to Rob like he was flying. His muscles moved like a river. It was hard to believe that a cage had ever contained him. It didn't seem possible. The tiger went leaping through the grass, moving farther and farther away from Rob and Sistine. He looked like the sun, rising and setting again and again. And watching him go, Rob felt his own heart rising and falling, beating in time. Okay, readers, we just completed chapter 27. Now, what repetition do you notice in this chapter? What word or words, phrase, or object is repeated in chapter 27? Remember, once you answer this question, you're going to answer the question using the author's craft prompt. Then you're going to prove your answer, giving 2 details from the text. Okay, so your answer should have looked something similar to this. So the quote from the text in chapter 27 is, "Get out of the way," he shouted, and they both jumped back and forth from the door and waited, but the tiger ignored them. He continued to pace back and forth in the cage, oblivious to the open door. The repetition you should have recognized from chapter 27 is the part that says, he continued to pace back and forth in the cage. We've heard this phrase before. It's come up a few times in the text. So using the author's craft prompt and then giving details to prove your answer, your response should have sounded something like this. In chapter 27 of The Tiger Rising, the author wrote the repeated phrase, he continued to pace back and forth in the cage, because she wants to show the reader that the tiger, just like Rob and Sistine, had grown accustomed to being locked up. The text says the tiger stopped pacing only to eat when Beauchamp introduced Rob to the tiger. The text also says that when Sistine was crying, the tiger paced back and forth without stopping. Okay, so we've seen this phrase before. It's come up multiple times in the text. When someone got next to the tiger continued to pace back and forth. He didn't stop. Why didn't he stop? You have to explain. The tiger got so accustomed to being locked up in the cage. Similarly to Rob and Sistine, who got so accustomed to being trapped. Rob was trapped with his feelings of sadness that he didn't like to think about, his not thoughts and not wishes. Sistine got so accustomed to her feeling stuck in the town that she didn't even want to talk about her dad anymore. Okay, so you can make all these connections as you're explaining this repetition. Now, it's your turn. You're going to go on to try this work on your own in your reading notebook.